Okay, we get kicked off this morning with, I'm very excited about the panels today. And then obviously our good friend Susan Martin is going to present in between, who's supported the HBPA for many years through Equine Line. But the first panel, fixed odds. It's been a topic, certainly at our conference, we've tried to figure out, was it 2016 or 2017 that we started this topic? Michelle has always been very beneficial and certainly helpful in helping put these panels together because, again, it's an avenue in racing that I think, again, within our mission statement, the National HBPA, we're going to promote thoroughbred racing and however best to promote it, we're going to try to see if we can help be on the forefront of things that are positive and things that work. So fixed odds, obviously new to the United States, but how do we make it work, right? So there's always been a lot of talk about the model in New Jersey. I've always said openly and publicly that, that's a different model in New Jersey. So we wanted to see and hope that it worked somewhere else in the United States. And we've always waved the flag. I was on a panel at the Global Symposium a few years back and really just tried to make sure that we were looking at it from the standpoint of being governed by the Interstate Horse Racing Act. That was what was important to us as horsemen, not something they have to deal with outside the states. So that was an avenue that we wanted to make sure continue to be covered and looked at. So making it work in horse racing, we're glad to have an expert panel of speakers up here, but we're also going to highlight Colorado, which is where we think it's going to get kicked off in a good way. So thanks to the sponsors for this panel, the Virginia HBPA, along with HRRN. Mike Penna has always been a great supporter of ours. But with that, let me introduce the panelists, our moderator, Michelle Fisher, Vice President of SIS, which again is a corporate sponsor of the National HBPA. And Michelle is also the founder of her Darting Star LLC consulting as well. The exalted one, oh, I'm sorry, did I miss that? Ed Fanaski, his other title is Executive Director of the Louisiana HBPA. Everybody knows him as the guy who has the brother that cooks great crawfish, but that's a different story too. Also, we have Kim Oliver. Very happy that Kim is here with us, President of the Colorado Horse Racing Association. She's really been in the weeds of trying to get this going alongside other weeds with the difficulties at Arapahoe, but she's navigating the waters well and certainly glad she was able to join us. And finally, my good friend Dan Hartman, who is the Associate Partner of Regulatory and Government Affairs at GMA Consulting. And I had no idea that Good Morning America actually consulted anything, but no, Dan, as many of you know, especially if you've attended ARCI conferences, he was really a staunch advocate in model rules. He's been very active within the ARCI for years, and now has kind of moved in some different directions, but still is very instrumental in helping Colorado in his previous role get to where they are today, and I think had a lot of positive movements for fixed odds in this industry. So with that, I will turn it over to Michelle. We'll go from there.
Thank you, Eric, and thank all of you for going on this journey with me at each HBPA conference. I'm very passionate that this is a way forward for us getting our sport on an equal playing field with all the other sports that are on sportsbook apps. We've heard what Eric has had to say about our illustrious panel here, but now I'm going to introduce them as Michelle's view of why I have everyone up here. I want to start off with Ed right next to me. I've worked with Ed for a long time, and Ed brings a very interesting background, having spent 20 years at the fairgrounds.
27.
Well, I've only known you 20. So 20 years we've worked together when you were at the fairgrounds heading wagering, and you were instrumental in launching ADW in that state, as well as rebuilding OTBs. And you're one of the few people in this realm that really understand the wagering side of things. And I've, enjoy having you up here to talk about it because your insight comes from a place of knowledge. So that's where Ed is here. And Kim, she's a new member of this group because she's a key stakeholder in Colorado. And it was really important in Colorado as we passed the regulations in order to allow fixed odds that we had the Colorado Horse Racing Association had to approve and give their consent. So Kim had to jump in and do a lot of research and help her group decide if this was a good thing for them or not. And then Dan Hartman, and we've known Dan for a long time, and he is the author of this regulation through a lot of stakeholder meetings. He was the director of gaming in Colorado. So he oversaw the launch of sports betting in that state. And it was one of the early states that's often pointed to as a model for regulation that was very business friendly and growth friendly. So, Dan was able to bridge that gap with horse racing because he had spent that time as the executive director of the Racing Commission, his time at the ARCI. So each of the members of this panel kind of bring a different perspective to this topic, but I thought it was important to have all of these perspectives here as we talk today. We're not just going to talk about fixed odds. You can't talk about betting on horse racing in a vacuum. We need to continually look at the wagering landscape across the US, and it's changed over the years. Horse racing historically has always depended on any kind of betting for their purses, and that's changed over the last 30 years as to what that model looks like. But we'll start with the metric that we always look at for success, and that's handle. And, we can talk about how we should be looking at revenue, but these are the figures from the Jockey Club. And Ed, I'd like to kind of go over these with you a little bit of what the trends have been on the parimutuel handle in the US and some of your insights.
Well, particularly what I focus on is, of course, Louisiana, because that's what affects my horsemen in my home state. And what we've seen over the years, I started before simulcast, and everything was the handle at the track, getting people out to the track, and getting that handle up. It was a great thing at the fairgrounds if we did $1 million handle on any particular day. Well, with the advent of simulcast wagering and then off-track wagering and then ADW, the actual amount of handle that is processed in Louisiana has fallen off a cliff. We, I would estimate 90% of all of the handle generated on the tracks in Louisiana comes from out of state, off track handle. So, and as other forms of gaming have come into play, slots, video poker, even HHR, we have been cannibalized for those gaming dollars. So why do I get so excited about, we call it fixed odds, but it's become more popular to say sports wagering on horse racing, right? Why am I so optimistic about sports wagering on horse racing? One, it generates purse money, revenue for the tracks, but purse money for my horsemen directly from the exciting product that I've known about my entire career, which is horse racing, right? There's people doing sports wagering on ping pong at pretty good volume.
We'll get to more of that later.
Right.
Yeah.
And Michelle will give you an update on that. Well, a horse race is 100,000 times more exciting than a ping pong match, in my opinion.
And I think looking at these numbers, you can see horse racing had a wonderful resurgence during the pandemic. We were the only game in town. The numbers went up. Last year, we saw a 3.7% decline. But the real number here to look at is that off track last year, 10.9 billion were bet off track, or most of it online, while only 7.4 was on track. And these graphs don't tell you everything. One of the things you need to remember as we go through this presentation is that handle in America on horse racing includes international betting. So a number of groups that bet into the US pools. We don't see that in sports wagering the same way because you have to physically be in a state to bet on that state's sports book. We're going to talk about this later in some of the other panels, but there is a large concern about what's happening with the number of what I'll call high volume players. Some people call them computer players, but that percentage of those players are rising in our pools. They've always been in our pools. They've been there since the 1980s, but we're seeing in some tracks 50% or more that are coming from these computer groups that are playing with each other. And I think that's part of we've lost a lot of our retail people playing on a day-to-day basis, and they're there for big days, but we don't see them day in and day out. And the everyday horse player, they feel that this is a detriment to them, and it is. So looking at where purses come from, well, there's two places the purses come from that are actually betting on real live horse racing, and that's parimutuel wagering, which we just discussed, and fixed odds wagering on live horse racing, and that can happen all over the world. You know, most of the tracks in the United States do send their signals out globally for betting with bookmakers and sports books. But what we've seen, you know, the relationship with horse racing has evolved with betting. And that goes back to a little history lesson in the 1990s, which you all probably remember when we launched our first Racino. And that was an interesting bedfellow. At the moment, horse racing was seeing a decline. They needed a boost, and the government wanted to expand gaming, and it's very hard to expand gaming in certain places, but it was much easier to work with a racetrack, where there was already betting, because that's an easier lift. We're just going to add a little bit more at this place, and that's how the Racino was born. And then followed in the early 2000 was the invention of HHR, or historic horse racing, in Arkansas. And these were pretty much the states that couldn't get VLTs. They came up with very innovative way for machines to use a back end side that was mathematically parimutually based. And we all know how successful it's been in Kentucky, Virginia, Wyoming, Arkansas. And then we see in some other states some government subsidies and grants. And in those states, we see these deals that are done not to go after gaming. I think in New Jersey, there's one that if the downstate Atlantic City casinos give a grant out to the tracks not to go after slot machines. And then sports betting. And that's an interesting one because horse racing can indirectly benefit from sports betting in the sense that a lot of the licenses have gone to racetracks, but there's no mandate in most states that any proceeds from these licenses actually go to the purses, with the exception of Louisiana, which I commend you on. And that was
It took a lot of legislative effort to secure that from a lot of our team, uh, to get a portion of the tax dedicated to purses in Louisiana.
and is that on all sports betting?
On every sports bet processed in Louisiana, we get a portion of the tax for purse dollars.
And the other thing you have to remember about sports betting, and while there are a number of physical sports betting locations, like where there's one here in this casino, most of the betting on sports happens online. And that's most likely around 90%, give or take, of the betting happens online. So let's delve a little bit more into Louisiana purses, Eddie. You've put together this graph on parimutuel versus VLTs, a little bit of HHR in here, tiny bit of fixed odds. I don't see sports on this one.
It was just getting started and it hasn't generated a great deal of purse money as of yet. But certainly as it grows in Louisiana, the purse portion of it will grow also. You know, we're dominated in Louisiana by purses generated by slots and by video poker operations throughout the state. Parimutuel, as I said, particularly with the fairgrounds, their export handle is approaching $4 million a day. That generates a sizable amount of purse money. The other three tracks do not generate as much parimutuel purse money for the races. The track on the western side near Houston is almost de minimis, anything other than what they generate from the slots.
So that would be Louisiana down.
Delta,
Delta, okay.
that would be Delta
Get my
down.
geography down.
So, it's nice. I mean, Louisiana horsemen have benefited from these other forms of gaming. And we've gone in and made the case, as these other forms of gaming came in, it was going to harm parimutuel, and therefore we needed to be made whole with something that would generate purses for our horsemen. And we've been, before I was with the organization, they were successful in securing that purse money. But as I was saying earlier, I particularly like the HHR, and I'm very excited about sports wagering and horse racing because it's directly tied to our product. It's directly tied to what our horsemen provide. Um, at some point, you always worry that a legislative body might feel that, well, why are we giving them all this other gaming money? It has nothing to do with horse racing. So it's a constant battle to reinforce, that it's important to keep our industry strong and moving forward. So, like I said, I don't mean to seem like we're ungrateful for the purse supplements, but truthfully, the more we generate directly from horse racing, I think the better off we are.
Jim, I'm gonna pass it over to you. You have a completely different situation in Colorado. What's happening there? How's your industry? Loaded question.
So in Colorado, we
You need to turn your mic on here.
Switch with me.
We want to hear you.
so in Colorado, we struggle immensely with our purse structure because we don't have any of the extra forms of wagering. We only have the parimutuel and the ADWs, but so our purse structure has struggled. We struggle with, and therefore we struggle with race days and keeping the industry going strong because we just continue to feel the struggle without having competing with other states for horses because of the purse structure we have.
And unfortunately, Colorado is an example of what the rest of horse racing may look like today in the US if we didn't have the other forms of gaming that help support us. So I think it's really important. We do take it for granted, Eddie, as we talk about, we can't do that because we turn to a state like Colorado who's just trying to keep their program alive and trying to keep horse racing. We saw dog racing go away in Colorado, and actually across the US except for West Virginia. But, horse racing's down to a very few days, 30-day meets at that. Now, Dan, can you give me, this is a question not on our script, which I warned you about.
Okay.
What happened in Colorado? There's casinos, there's sports betting. What happened to racing in your opinion? You were there for a front row seat. Why didn't they get any of this?
I think it goes to the lobbying effort from the casinos, from the casino industry in Colorado. Every time there was an attempt to bring the VLTs, HHR, whatever it was, to the racetrack itself, there was a tremendous push from the casino industry to block that. And any kind of new gaming in Colorado has to go in front of the voters, and get put in. So there were massive amounts of money spent on both sides to try to get it done. But it seemed like the gaming industry always won out, as they put out the ads, they did the other things to keep it from going any further than the 3 mountain towns that it's in right now.
Eddie, what do you all do in Louisiana to try to protect that money?
We engage our legislature constantly, between, reminding them that our horsemen live throughout the state, that each of the legislators, you have horsemen in your district. And if you need us to have them call you, we'll get them to call you. And we just stress that, the horsemen, these are small operations, and generally the legislature is more sympathetic than trying to help the big gaming companies that own the racetracks.
And there's always this risk in the United States of untethering this relationship that started in the 1990s between casinos and the requirement to have racing in order to have that casino. And we've seen that in dog racing. As dog racing has gone away, these racinos or casinos now still exist, and there's no need to have them tethered together. And we see as the ownership of these properties are put under immense pressure with added costs, that they more and more are looking for ways to untether it. It's something we don't always talk about, but it is a reality. We're on a thin string here. And I think the point here is not to talk about all of our problems, but it's to say that we do need to, as we look forward to how horse racing is going to stay relevant, grow in the future, we have to go back to horse racing. We still want all of these things we have, and we're going to keep them, but we need to make the horse racing product more viable in the marketplace. So as we think about that, let's turn our attention to sports. And this is a completely different story than the story we're talking about here on horse racing with the numbers. You can't turn on a TV, a broadcast of any sporting event without talking about the lines and looking at ads from the sports books. PASPA was repealed in 2018. And since that time, we've seen 38 states and the District of Columbia legalize sports betting, maybe a little bit different in each state, slightly different. Last year, their handle was $121 billion, and it continues to grow. It's a 46% increase year on year. Remember, we declined 3.7%. More telling is the betting revenue. In 2023, it was 11 billion was the betting revenue. And we just don't, there's a lot of states to go. I mean, Dan, you were instrumental in Colorado, getting it up and running early and putting everything in place. And, tell me about the sports scene in the United States in your opinion.
Well, I think you hit it on the head. I think, it's been growing extremely fast. It's something that I think a lot of folks were doing anyway, using black market, using other things and things that they did. So putting it into a legal, safe market has just exploded. In Colorado, we're doing about, they're monthly, it's about $500 to $600 million in sports wagers. And it continues to grow. Obviously, there's a couple big states that have not fallen yet, and they may take a while to do that, just because of their politics. But you're seeing just about every state, every place, and the ones that are still white or gray on that map doesn't mean that they're not sports betting in those states. It just means they're not sports betting legally through a state sponsored wagering component. So I think that's the big thing when you look at what you can do, with sports betting revenue. If the legislature deems it like they did in Louisiana, you can get some redirection of tax money and other things. In Colorado, the tax money goes to water. And I think that's, that was a big push to have it go through. But it's exploded. It's very much a huge industry. And I think that's what we've saw. In Colorado, we launched, we had the fun of launching in May of 2020. when there were no sports. And I think that we looked at the we launched with ping pong, we launched with Korean baseball and darts from Australia. But I think that what we've seen in Colorado and what we'll talk about a little bit is the popularity of some of those obscure sports that are on our catalog that do a lot of money. The ping pong has stayed within the top 10 sports all the way through, doing about $10 million a month. And I know one time, I think it was on the same panel as Eric, we were talking in Tucson, and I said that we did $117 million between OTB Live and ADW in Colorado, 2022. We did $119 million on ping pong.
And I didn't mean to disparage ping pong. It's a fine game. I just in comparison to horse racing.
I would agree with you, and that's why I kind of took up the challenge to get it going. So
Well, and the two states that you pointed out are Texas and California, and they are big states that we expect in time will happen. And we look at this slide, and I think the point is, I've come to a lot of these meetings and I hear the horse racing folks say, well, I don't know if we want to go on there. I don't know. We need this amount of money, or we can't possibly take that. And there are so many obscure sports that are taking up that challenge onto sports books, because what do sports books need? They need content. They need content that's available all hours of the day. And we all know there's not NFL on 24 hours a day. There's not ML, NBA, and Major League Baseball. So you need to have on a sports book a lot of other content. So when a person comes on, they've got something to bet. And we've proven it all over the world that people will bet pretty much on anything that's available on that time zone that they pick up. They pick up their mobile app and want to have a bet. It may not be their favorite sport, but it is something to do. I mean, Dan, we just talked about ping pong. What are some of the other, I see, I'm on the emails and I see women's water polo come by. I see all kinds of interesting sports that come by that get approved onto catalogs in these states. What are some of the other ones that may surprise people in the audience that do relatively well?
well, I think that what you see is what you're seeing with a lot of the sports, and to get on the catalog in most states, certainly in Colorado, you have to have a lot of things in place. You've got to have integrity services. You have to have policies that govern the athletes, that govern those kind of things. The Highlight in Florida actually changed their game to become a little bit different, and make it more of a sports betting offering. You've got slap fighting. You've got all kinds of things that are out there that people will bet on. And I think that and Michelle, you can talk a little bit about esports and betting on video games.
Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And we talked about it yesterday on one of the panels when Price mentioned Minecraft. Well, at SIS, for those of you, you know me, but I've been at SIS for 4 years, and it's a 35-year-old company that started in horse racing. And it was put together to be able to distribute horse racing to bookmakers around the world. At the moment, the company represents about 175 racetracks, and we send that into probably over 50 countries. And that was why the company was developed. And we don't just do contracts. We also bring in the video and create channels. We put all the data in the same format. We do the prices, the fixed odds pricing, and package that all up, because what we know sportsbooks want is they want to buy one package, one service with content that goes 24/7. So at our company, we took that idea of horse racing and spun it into to esports or video games. So this is, I always blow people's mind. They're like, how do you work in a sport that's so immature that people don't even know what it is? And then one like horse racing that's very old and traditional. but there's so many similarities in the two, the way in which we did it. So we know about the short form. They need short form content. That means you don't want a game that goes on for hours. So we do esports in 8 to 12 minutes. We play head to head, two guys playing a basketball game, NBA 2K or soccer. And we don't go after the young players that everyone thinks these sports is about. We're going after sports players. We put it on a basketball tab. So when an NBA game is over, they're going to play the video version of it, the esports version of two players playing against each other. They have referees, we have a regulatory body, but we'll do 150,000 of those matches a year. And we launched this in 2020. It was already underway before the pandemic started. And to date, we've bet on our product alone, which are two titles, 150,000 games now, 3.4 billion around the world on two guys playing head to head video games. So I know very well how much people will bet on a lot of different things and how important this content is. And so, when we have this conversation, I don't look at the reasons why horse racing shouldn't be on it. I think about it, well, how do we get here? How do we get to be part of this? And we'll talk more about the particulars of it, but this is what's happening out there. Dan?
And just one more thing about content, I think, and what you're saying, and we'll talk a little bit about it, what we're seeing in Colorado, but all these sports are coming up with they're not just putting their bets out there and putting them on a betting platform. They're actually streaming live their product, and so you can watch the product, or you can watch the match, whatever it is, on your phone, and have it in front of you when you're doing it. So it brings the content to there. It brings the video of the game, so you can watch it live. And I think that's the big, the big thing, that somebody's got their phone. They can make their bet. They can watch the event, and follow along with it.
And it's a good point, Dan, because our esports, we stream it out. It has sub-second latency, and we see the majority of our betting coming on in play. And so long ago, when we used to have the simulcast conferences in horse racing, we used to talk about latency and the importance of it. And horse racing had a monopoly on ADW. We were the only game in town. We were streaming, a few second latencies, but now all these other sports have caught up and they are offering their product real time. Eddie, you have anything to add to that?
Well, I didn't want to get ahead of where you're heading to, but I remember, when we launched Account Wagering in Louisiana, we had a channel, right? A local cable channel. And it was not a polished production. It was simply a four-way split screen. And we would pick the four best products for our market, right?
Mhm.
It was a huge success. Years after we were purchased by Churchill and they decided to do away with the channel, I had customers at the track, customers at the OTB. Whatever happened to that TV channel? We used to love to watch that TV channel. It just connects with your customer. So then we moved on to a streaming platform, but we never had the cutting edge when we were just an independent track in New Orleans.
I think the point of that is viewers consume content differently today. And at that time, you were on the forefront. But now if you're like me, I don't even have cable. I watch everything on demand. Things have changed and the industry is keeping up with that. And we're doing that in horse racing as well. So not to say we're not, but we're not alone in it.
Yeah, I think where we're falling short though is in the general promotion of horse racing. Even though the content's available, the industry, in my opinion, has failed to promote itself, to get our product in front of more eyes.
It's funny you say that because Dan and I had a conversation. We were at another conference and we listened to a panel about how do we get people to horse races, and we were having a flashback that it was the 1980s because we've all been talking about this topic since the 1980s. And there's been some really good things that have been done in horse racing, but we haven't quite kept up with the other sports in that sense. I mean, Dan, we were talking about that. I mean, why do we keep having these panels and why are we falling short?
I think that when we started early with simulcasting, it was bringing the content to other folks, to OTBs, to other things. Then added ADWs, all the different pieces that we've done, but it seems to me like we are, over the years have made it easier for the same folks to bet. You hear a lot of talk about, well, over the years, we've talked about, well, we'll educate them, we'll teach them how to bet, we'll teach them how to do par mutual, do those things. We'll make a new set of racing fans. And I think that what we see is the demographics of horse racing, and racing is getting older, and they're dying off. I mean, I have to say that. It says it in every conference I go to, and I think that that's the and I think we're probably going to get there, but that was the the leading edge of why I said, look, demographics and bringing horse racing, which I think is a great product, and better than watching a ping pong match, that you're going to bring it to a new set of demographics that you don't have right now.
I think that's a good point, Dan, and that does segue into where we're going because horse racing does a good job on their ADWs. I mean, I have multiple accounts. I love to get on them and bet, but I like horse racing and I've always liked horse racing and I seek it out. But I think when you go out on the street and you meet somebody and you talk about horse racing, someone's not going to wake up one day and say, I'm going to try to bet horse racing. Let me sign up for this account. Let me give them my social security number and all my banking information, and I'm going to see if I like it. It just doesn't happen that way. So I think for me, when we talk about sports books, it is an opportunity for us to reach a group that we know that like to wager, we know they like sports, and introduce them to horse racing. And that leads me to the slide that we have here and what has been done with sports books. So the first thing we talked about is that many racetracks did get licenses for sports books, and they have skins, which they have sold to and done arrangements with to all the big sports books, FanDuel, DraftKings, et cetera. They're operating them, and the racetrack does benefit. There's often sports books at racetracks. So these are all very positive things, bringing those people into the building. And we've seen the first step, the tiptoe into the sports books. And where we've seen that is we've seen sports books having white label ADWs. What does that tell you? That tells me, at least, that they know horse racing works. Most of these these sports book operators operate all over the world, and they have horse racing. They know horse racing does work on a sports book, but it's not available in most states here in the US. So the next best thing is, can we get in on this ADW? And we've seen them, they get white labels. So they don't create their own. They pretty much do a skin from either one of the big guys, the Twin Spires, Naira Bets, or Express Bet, and they put it out there. Some of them, such as FanDuel Racing, which is TVG, who had been a very big player and a supporter of racing for many years, started with the shared wallets, and that's great. But the bettors have to go to a pari-mutuel platform, and the betting is not fixed odds as every other sport. It is pari-mutuel, but that's good. And it's been really popular on big race days. They've seen players, they may not understand pari-mutuel, but they want to get a bet on the Derby, so they're going to bet on that. So that's been very positive. But I don't think we're seeing the kind of handle increases on those ADWs as we're seeing the kind of growth on sports, what it would have on sports. And pari-mutuel, it's not better or worse than fixed odds. It's just different. Obviously, we talk about the takeout, the hold to the track and to the horseman is much more in pari-mutuel. And if there wasn't sports betting, there'd be no reason for me to be up here talking and advocating, let's have fixed odds. but we do have it here in the US, and we do have to take a serious look at putting horse racing on there. And parimutuel, it's no risk to the operator. Now, fixed odds, this is more about this list is more about what's in the US, but is is used around the world and has been for a long time. It sits in countries with parimutuel. There are countries that only do parimutuel. But once fixed odds come into that country, I think you can't ignore it. So where we are today in the US on a sports book, we are live in Colorado, and that has taken a lot of work. We're going to talk about how we got there, because I'm proud to say last year when we sat here, this deal was not done. There's a possibility in New Jersey that we may go on to a sports book, and we can get into the nuances of that. But currently it's only associated with Monmouth Park at the moment at a racetrack. And it's nice for people who play horses. They get a choice, but it's not really bringing in new players. There's a lot of hesitation to include horse racing on the sports catalog by gaming regulators, and we're the ones that scare them because of how we can't come together and want to be on there. And the nice thing about fixed odds that we bring is it just doesn't depend on liquidity. So meaning when we talk about parimutuel, we always talk about how big is your pool, because more money brings more, a bigger pool brings more betting. But in fixed odds, it's the sports book or the bookmaker that's taking the risk and moving those lines. So as long as you have a full field, and the magic number is 8 or more, and your favorite does not win over 40% of the time, you're going to see small tracks can thrive in this marketplace as long as they're competitive. And that's a big difference. And they can do bets the tote doesn't. So again, not an either or, but working together in a different outlet. Ed, I'm going to start with you. I know we all have things to say before we move on into the specifics of Colorado. You want to add to some of
Well,
my points? I mean, we talked
yeah,
about these points. and
we
I've
talk about
delivered
them all the time, but there's aspects of parimutuel that are more attractive for certain types of wagers, and then there's aspect of fixed odds that are more advantage for a expanded wagering product, right? You can't bet an over and under currently on the parimutuel system. If a certain trainer has 5 horses in and you want to bet that he's going to win 3 or more of his races, you can do that on fixed odds. And as Dan said earlier, the demographic that is on the sports wagering platforms, that's their culture. That's what they're used to betting on. Those types of, you can call them prop bets, you can call them, whatever you want, but innovative products that appeal to them. And that's what the sports wagering offers, to get our horse racing exciting product in front of a much larger customer base and in new and innovative ways. So I know we're going to talk a little bit later about protecting the purses.
Yeah.
So I won't go into that now, but this is the second part of it. If you have a product and you want to sell it, do you want to be just in the mom and pop store around the corner? Or do you want to be on Amazon, Walmart, and the other big retailers? And that's what we get when we get our product on FanDuel, DraftKings, and all of the other big operations that are actively promoting, that are actively seeking customers. Horse racing, as I said earlier, I see no concerted effort to engage customers. We, all through the 90s at the simulcast conventions, there was a panel every year, the aging parimutuel customer base and how do we attract new and young customers. And they came up with a lot of innovative ideas, but they never seemed to go anywhere.
Dan?
Yeah, and as you talked about the parimutuel product and the white label products going on to onto sports books, the fixed odds is not going to be an overnight change to sports books. And I think that, having any exposure to horse racing is good. You know, that they can make a bet, they can do some of those things. But I think what hopefully we talk about as we go on is what it looks like, and what it looks like to do sports betting, and how if it's integrated right into the sports book, with sports book odds, with the different types of bets, it really does become a product that I think we will see, and we're seeing, is picking up some traction, at least, you know, even with just one sports book in Colorado.
So once the regulations were put in place in Colorado, the company that I work with, SIS, we went to work to get the consents needed to be able to do this. And we'll talk about the regulations here in a minute. But what that resulted in was launching in February with Bet365. And many of you may not, oh, they want to talk about fixed odds?
I didn't get my wager in on the
Panelist, Dan, panelist. Wow. Anyway, we launched in February 2024, and Bet365, for those of you who may not be familiar with the brand, is one of the biggest bookmakers in the world. It's very well known, not a big brand here in the US. They're privately owned. They offer horse racing globally, and they're very successful. At SIS, they're one of our bigger clients. Again, they take all 175 of our racetracks in over 50, 60 countries, with horse racing. So when we came to them and said Colorado's going to be a go, they said great. So all they had to do was turn it on, just ungeo block it and turn it on, and they're licensed, and so not quite that easy, but the presentation is the same. They had an efficiency of scale. The part that makes it a little bit challenging is that they only have 3% market share on sports betting in Colorado. So they're not one of the big guys here in the US. If you look at a FanDuel or a DraftKings, they've got 85% of the market combined, or almost 90 in some states. So this is a small book. They've only promoted it to customers on the platform. We have a mechanism to put racetracks on the sports betting catalog in Colorado, and that really involves making sure that the regulator sees the consent from the track, the racing regulatory body, and the horseman. And SIS's portfolio is now live in Colorado with 155 racetracks. And while we don't have the specific numbers up here, it's not that we're hiding anything, but it was a decision made by the Division of Gaming with only one sports book live. We didn't want to put the numbers out, but I do assure you that the numbers do go to the Division of Gaming and the Colorado stakeholders, including the Horsemen's Group and the racetrack every month. But what we have seen there is we've seen a big jump in the numbers. There's not big volume, but we've seen over this time incremental increases every month, and it's encouraging. You know, it is a monumental first step because this is the first sports book that horse racing has been on in the US on a regular basis. I know there have been times that certain product has been offered as a gimmick in New Jersey, for instance, but this is the first time day in, day out. They have that many racetracks. We do not have a lot of domestic tracks. And thank goodness, we have enough content to keep the channel going all day. With international, we do need to have more domestic tracks to move this forward, because people always like to bet on what they know and what's local. But this is a really good first start, and I'm pretty encouraged by it. And I think I'm going to turn this over to Dan. You bet on this. You're allowed to now that you're not a regulator. Let's talk about this experience with horse racing on Bet365.
Sure. I mean, it's fun to look at a sports book and pull up the race and see sports book odds, not just par mutual odds, but look at sports book odds and have the ability to make a wager on it, and then watch the race, and they're clicking through pretty good. Different tracks, different places. as I was getting these pictures here. But it hasn't improved my handicapping any, but it is there on your handheld, on your phone, and you can engage in a race about every 4 to 5, 6 minutes. And it's kind of, it's fun. It's different, but it's fun.
Kim, do you have anything to say about Bet365 and this launch?
Yeah, so with selling it to the horsemen, it was when we finally did go live, and I'm trying to educate the horsemen as to what this is. I'm telling them you have to download the app, get your Bet365 app. You know, you can bet, you can thumb through it. You can say, oh, I'm gonna bet on football, baseball. Whoa, there's a little horse in there. Let's see what that is. You can click it and brings up the Louisiana tracks, Prairie Meadows, and then Australia, uh, like
Saudi, there's
yeah.
a lot of them.
all over the place. And it's really pretty exciting because I'm still in the learning phases also. I'm like, I deposited my money and I'm ready to take the bet, but I'm like, okay, I have this whole educational thing that I have to do. Um, so that we can start educating our horsemen too, so that our, what we continue to talk about as horsemen is, because we see hardly any people come to the track, because of our product. But as we continue to hopefully get people in Colorado excited about horse racing, that's the main goal, is if we have the people that are on their phones, you know, TikTok and watching 2 minutes of things all the time, and they can see, well, I bet on my NFL, it's going to take 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours to see what my bet in the horse racing, it's done. You got, oh, hey, this is kind of exciting. And they're like, Arapahoe Park, what? I didn't even know we had a track. We have racehorses here. And then hopefully those players will come to the track.
Now, Bet365 has been a great partner to horse racing around the world. They sponsor a number of races in the United Kingdom. They sponsor entire racetracks, naming rights in Australia. And we're hoping to see what happens in Colorado, that they can actually work with the track, but we're waiting to see about that meet and where it comes. And Kim, I want to thank you for pointing out the tracks that were, we'll say, brave to the US tracks that were willing to start. And those were the Louisiana tracks. Thank you, Eddie, for pushing through that. And Prairie Meadows. We grabbed Prairie Meadows because we just wanted to give a nod to them, as you know, they did a lot of analysis to say, well, how much pari-mutuel wagering were we getting in Colorado? Is that going to hurt it? And the decision was no, let's give it a try. And we have a few more tracks coming on board here soon in the US, but it is a step by step. You know, we're happy with the results so far, but we're just scratching the surface as we get more domestic tracks on board. And let's face it, you know, Colorado is not a bastion for horse racing. Sorry, Dan, Kim, but that's the truth. And to see the numbers and to see the uptake that we're getting there just tells me if it's on more books and bigger books and in other states, it's going to hold its own compared to some of these other content products.
And I don't want to, again, if it's not time yet, just tell me, hold off. But you hit upon, one of the things I want to talk to the other affiliates about. You have to make your own determination as far as the risk reward. As Michelle said, that's Iowa took a look at what was being generated out of Colorado on their product and decided, well, we're going to give this a try. And that's pretty much what we did in Louisiana. Not that Colorado doesn't bet on us, they do bet pari-mutually on us, but it's not as big a risk as a larger state that generates a much larger pari-mutuel. So it's much more palatable to risk any negative impacts on pari-mutuel from that situation. And that's what all of the affiliates need to look at their particular situation. Again, I think Colorado is very similar to Louisiana in that we don't generate a tremendous amount of in-state processing of pari-mutuel wagers. So we've been attempting and we've been working with legislators to try to get it off the ground in Louisiana. Also, because it's not as big a risk as somewhere like Ohio, who has a much larger population, generates a lot more pari-mutuel within his state. Dave has a much more difficult decision to make. Louisiana, I've been boring my board members to death, telling them this is the right path for Louisiana.
And one of the things I advise tracks when they look at it, this is not just about, yes, you had to look in the beginning, what does Colorado generate? But this is about globally. You know, when a company is like mine, when we partner with a racetrack, our goal is to maximize revenue for that racetrack. We're going to have a sports book or bookmaker on this side that wants to pay the lowest amount possible, and a racetrack wants to pay the most. They want to be paid the most amount possible. And we have to meet in the middle with what makes sense compared to other content. And remember how much volume we're talking about. Yes, you make more money on pari-mutuel, but when you look at distributing your product globally, so I may not be making a lot of money here in the US with X product, but I'm distributing it globally. So all these foreign tracks that I'm bringing in, they're thrilled. This is a new market for them. They're thrilled with anything that comes out of this. It's just as US tracks, when we send their content somewhere else, they're thrilled to get this money. But we need to put it all together and look at these two products very distinctly. This is our pari-mutuel product and we can send it globally. And this is our fixed odds product and we can send it globally. And right now we're just kind of easing into it where we're looking at it state by state. But I do want to get that long-term mentality out of just looking at, oh, I'm only going to send it to this state and not that state. It's going to be about having that volume globally. So let's get into some of the nuts and bolts and what happened in Colorado. Dan and I spent a lot of time on your stakeholder meetings, and I think a lot of people did, and it was a great approach. You had to approach this differently. This isn't legislation you wrote. You added this onto the catalog through regulation. So there were certain things you were allowed to do by law and not allowed to do by law. And I think to get this thing moving, you've done a really great job, including everybody, listening to the input. And, tell us a little bit about how the Division of Gaming and you in particularly approached this and got it to where we are today.
Well, I think from my unique perspective of regulating horse racing and regulating gaming and sports betting, I was the person got approached by the books as they started to talk about it and started to talk about what might be possible. And I think that one of the things that I knew, and one of the things that had to take place is that, um, you know, it's scary. I think Kim can probably say that. I mean, I think everybody that looks at it, every horseman's group, every horse track, every content provider is certainly looking at it to say, and trying to educate themselves on what the numbers mean and how they work. But we looked at it. We looked at it from the standpoint of not opening legislation. The sports books are not keen on reopening legislation where anything can happen and anything can go on. But we looked at it from the standpoint of, look, it's a sport. I've always thought of horse racing as a sport, and we looked at it going forward to put it onto our catalog as a sport. We carved out a piece of our rules that talked about, the same rule that talked about how you put ping pong on the catalog or anything else. We carved out a page and a half on how you get the sport of horse racing onto the catalog, and taking into account the Interstate Horse Racing Act. I know that Eric and I had a lot of conversations about protecting that right, that Interstate Horse Racing Act and how it works. And really looking at that, we built into the rule as the sports book wants to put on the sport of horse racing, they have to go to each racetrack, and with a content provider like SIS, they can do it for them. But everyone has to give their consent, just like they do with simulcasting. So, and one of the things we stress within our stakeholder meetings, we had everyone invited, everyone is involved to put in their opinions, what they wanted to see in the rule. But I think what it really did for us is it allowed us to educate all the players. It allowed the horse track and the horsemen's group to have that say and that consent for giving their signal to the sports book. And with that consent, came the negotiations with the content provider to come out with what that meant financially to them, and what portion of the pie that was going to be. I think we've already said that the take is bigger, and it's more set in par mutual. Um, but when you look at the margins that are smaller in horse racing or in sports betting, you're looking at educating people on what that really means and what those percentages mean and how that works. I know that there'll be other legislative attempts at fixed odds that will probably write in what percentages are going to be, and that might be perfect for all kinds of states. We felt that getting it done by rule, we have a 2-year kind of a trial period on that rule to let it play out, and but it doesn't mean that if the horsemen believe that it's influencing the handle, changing their purses, doing other things, that they can't pull that consent at any time. And we were very clear about that. And I think it's very fundamental to the Interstate Horse Racing Act. If you don't feel like selling your signal is being profitable to the and good for purses or good for the racetrack itself, that they could stop it at any time or renegotiate it at any time. And I think that was the key to what we did, and kind of a promise that I made all along. And probably why I was approached about it at first, because I understood both pieces.
Well, I just wanted to add, someone had to be first. We had tried to be first in Louisiana. We just haven't gotten there yet. So I want to thank Colorado, because for everyone in the room, there's a lot of unknowns that you've just enumerated, right? And y'all are serving as the test bed that's going to kind of show, does the model work? We all believe, are the ones that are, are very much believe that this is the right path for horse racing to go into. Y'all are doing, just a tremendous value to the rest of these HBPAs by demonstrating just how it can work.
And I think what you're seeing is that because of the fixed ability or the fixed numbers that are coming out of par mutual, there's a hesitancy for a lot of folks and operators and things to move forward in this because they know what it is. I think what we're trying to say is as horsemen's group, as you're part of the conversation, is, let us help you, educate you. Let us try to get the same kind of a model going, but work on the ownership that is partnered with your signal and your product, and talk about, let's try it. Let's put it out there. Let's get some more domestic feeds out there. Some of the big races, I'd love to see what they would do on a Bet 365 or a FanDuel or a DraftKings, and not just being redirected to an ADW, where you got to kind of re-engage with another platform. I think that one of the things we haven't hit on, we kind of talked a little bit about it, and why you would want to even think about it as horsemen is the demographics. You've got in horse racing, you've got demographics that are 50 and plus in years for the most part. They're 50 and older, and really 60 and older in playing par mutual horse racing. Uh, the people that are on the apps, the nearly 1 million people in Colorado that have downloaded apps and are playing sports betting and playing 500 to $600 million a month are 50 and below, and most of them are 20 or 30, 45 or 40 to 35 and below. They are people that you're not generally seeing at the track. I think they're people that would, once they get into it, once they understand it, once they start seeing it, they may even start to come out to your racetrack. That was one of the things that I've always thought, that if you put you and one thing that everybody talks about at all these meetings, if they just knew our product, if they just understood our product, they'd come out and see it. And I think this is a way to say, look, you're seeing the race. It's not TikTok, but it's the same kind of thing. You're seeing it, and maybe you want to go see it live. You want to go see something that makes it exciting. And I think I think that's one of the things that I see that hopefully comes out of racing or out of fixed odds. I think you've got a younger demographic in Australia and other places that are playing it, and they're actually coming out to the racetrack and playing.
As SIS is the only contents provider at the moment that's licensed in Colorado and distributing horse racing, it it was a challenge to get this to work from the economic side. And as a company, we depend on horse racing to be healthy in order to have something to distribute. So we don't want to sell it for the lowest price because then it's not healthy for them, for the racetracks, so it's not healthy for us. And so going into this, we've always known that the local track needed to receive, we'll call it a source market fee. It's not called that in the regulations, but a source market fee to benefit. And I will say on the model, and you did what you could within the parameters of your regulations, is that it was a little easier in Colorado because there was one racetrack and one horseman's group. I can't imagine trying to negotiate what that fee is with 4 racetracks, 7 racetracks in a state and a horseman's or 2 horsemen's groups with mixed breeds. So, I am an advocate moving forward that it is a fixed amount that goes to purses. I personally let you all decide how it gets distributed. But from that side, I mean, Kim, we worked together and we had to extend this regulation because it took so long just to negotiate between the track and the content provider for us to come in and distribute this racing from these 155 racetracks. You know, Kim, talk about you've talked a little bit about some of the apprehensions you had in the process we went through, because one point I couldn't get you at your group, not you, to talk to me. And then you came back and it was a lot to get to where we got.
Yeah, I think always the horsemen are worried about live racing and tying it to live racing. And so I think when first of all, we had to educate, I had to educate myself, and then we had to educate our board, and then we had to educate everybody else. And then we had to have the conversations with the track about what is this going to look like. And I think the biggest fear is always the live racing. What is this going to do to live racing? We have to tie it to live racing. And the way Dan has it set up is it takes three consents and any of us can pull it at any time. So the horseman, the track, or the division of racing. So if any of the entities are being hurt by the fixed odds, we can say, well, we don't like this, pull it. So I think that was a big fear that I think we were able to squash. And you know, even though Colorado, we're such a small player on the big field, it worked in our advantage because we are small. We didn't have anything really to lose
No.
by going forward.
No, and we thank you. And I think as we get more numbers, we can prove moving forward. And as we look at the slide, everyone heard the hype about New Jersey. I think we heard a lot of hype about that, and we really haven't seen many results there. And you may compare New Jersey to Colorado, the only two states in which fixed odds is allowed, specifically allowed. And I think it's worth addressing that in New Jersey, they did create separate legislation, but it wasn't part of the Racing Commission and it wasn't part of the Division of Gaming who oversees sports betting. It sits by itself. And I'm holding out hope that at some point we are able to distribute our portfolio of horse racing to sports books in New Jersey. But at this point, I've spent a lot of time reading that bill, speaking to people. The way it is written, it had no input from anyone outside a small group of people, and it's very hard to navigate and to get onto a sports book. But I do hold out hope that at some point we will be able to move forward in that state. They did some interesting things there with eliminating taxes. And I always make the joke, find a regulator that wants to regulate something that is not taxed. And I think there could have been some more interesting things they could have done by taking the source fee and putting it in place of those taxes if the state was willing to give them up. But that's where it is at the moment. It's only at the racetrack and on a separate ADW, or not ADW, but a separate fixed odds platform. But we're looking forward to other potential states and different regulatory formats. Sports wagering is different in every state. I mean, Eddie, you've looked at a couple different formats within your group.
Yeah, we've had a lot of discussions. We looked at different ways to accomplish this, and mainly what I tell all of the affiliates is just make certain that there is a dedicated source to purses from the activity, right? That's what we have to make sure of. Sounds like that's what Colorado did, so that as it matures, as it grows, that horse racing sees the benefits of this form of gaming. And that's what we've looked at it a half a dozen different ways in Louisiana to try to make sure we secure that revenue stream to the purses.
So we're not moving the needle yet, but we've taken some good first steps. And I'm constantly asked, since I have been yammering on about this topic for now years, why is it taking so long? Why? Sports wagering's growing. Why is this taking so long? And it's our industry. Number one, we're divided and we do have economic conflicts with this type of betting. When you look at the owners of large ADWs, you see it as a threat to revenue. They're concerned that there's going to be a cannibalization, that they're going to lose this great takeout, this great revenue, moving over to betting that shows a lower fee back to the racing, but more volume. And so naturally there is this inclination to want to protect what you have. And we just don't know how many of those players will move and how many of them will be new players. I mean, I'm banking on new players. I'm not naive that there won't be some players that will shop and arbitrage, but I think that's going to be the minority of them. Uh, but again, until we do something and we have numbers, we can't sit up here and say this is going to happen or that's going to happen. So that's one of the things. And you come to government, you come to anyone, and you have two or three groups within the industry all wanting to do something differently and in a different way. That usually means nothing gets done. And I think that we've seen this with sports betting. We've seen some. We'll repeat. We've seen some really good steps with the shared wallet and the bolting on. So those are all very positive, but it's just taking a little longer to get to the point where we're confident. I think that, the New Jersey hype hurt us. When I give them all the credit for being the first to come out with this. It was hyped as it was going to be bigger than parimutuel wagering. Well, it could be, but that could be 10 years, 20 years from now. And I think that when it didn't didn't produce the results and partially is as a strategy in which they took on of putting it at the racetrack, not where the sports bettors were. I think it hurt it. And I've heard a lot of people say, well, it failed there. Let's just throw it away. Well, I don't share that sentiment at all. And I don't think the group here does. And that's part of what I said, the economic model. What are the expectations versus what is the reality? What you think you should get because you get this in pari-mutuel, it's totally different. It's not that you come to the table to a sports book and they say, okay, horse racing is worth this. When you deal with a sports book, they're looking at lots of product, whether it be esports, whether it's horse racing, ping pong, water polo, paddle, paddleball, whatever. They're looking at that and they're going to give content the priority that's eligible for betting in multiple states. So if I had a choice and I'm a sports book and I can pick up a piece of content I can put in 15, 20 states, or one I can put in one, I'm going to pick that one. Because there's technical roadmaps. I mean, this is not just a plug and play for them. They have to do technical work to take this in. They take in data feeds. They manage the risk and the pricing. There's an expense to offer this product. So it's slow when we're in one state. What I am expecting, in Colorado, I'm hoping by the end of the year, we're going to have 2 more small books on board and we'll start to see what they do. That's our goal, internal goal to move forward. And it's about the amount of content that's available. What we saw in New Jersey is they had maybe a dozen racetracks. That's not enough. Forget that it's not on a sports book, but what a sports book wants is content all day long, all night long. And we see specifically from the numbers we've seen in Colorado that people are betting at certain times of day. It's not because it's great racing or the best racing in the world. They're betting because I just finished my dinner and this is the time I'm going to get on and let's see what's live. Sometimes it's at 4 a.m. So we are seeing that trend, which is the same that we see around the world, that people will bet on this product because by time of day. We prefer to have local product, domestic product, but we were able to get to where we are due to our portfolio of content. If we were just trying to send 2 US racetracks into a sports book, no way would we be where we are. It had to be enough to make it work. And, the other thing that makes it take so long in the US is that the marketplace for sports betting is much different here than it is in other places where we have a finite number in each state of how many sports books can be licensed. Colorado has a certain number, and that's the only groups we can do business with. And to top that off, we have 2 big sports books that dominate the market. So we're going to get there. When you say, what's my path forward? We need to make Colorado successful. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean that we're doing a large volume, but it's showing that we're seeing growth and we're seeing additional sites coming on board and hopefully, having additional states. And Ed, I can see you're just
Yeah.
chomping to talk about some more things.
I wanted to ask you a question, but before that, have everyone understand, the sports book will not offer the product if it's not something that they can make a margin on. And I wanted to have Michelle hopefully answer that I'm correct, that horse racing worldwide enjoys a better margin than most other sports.
It
Correct?
does. It does.
So it makes us attractive.
And it can vary from country to country what that margin will be and product to product. It may be a little bit more difficult on domestic versus international. We see a range of margins. It's a healthy piece of content compared to other sports. At our company, we deal with 400 operators around the world that take horse racing. And I speak to operators all the time that have no idea about anything about horse racing. We just know we need it in this market. And we're teaching them how to bet on it and how the prices come over and what to do. And they feel they need it on their content. So we do see that. And then you go into markets such as the UK and Australia, and they're very savvy. And it's a whole different ball game than it is in Cyprus or Spain. So we do see that horse racing is a piece of content that bookmakers traditionally like. They do well with it. They're willing to take it into markets that don't have horse racing. So yes, Eddie, it is, but there are other lot of more popular sports out there. They're not clamoring for our product, but they'd like to have it if it's comparable to other products, pricing wise.
And I know we gotta wrap up, but just remember that, with a sports book, with a bet, I know there's been many times I've said in conferences where they've talked about, how do we make it more exciting? How do we make it more fun? What do we need to do to get those people out here? When you can bet, field against the favorite, you can put a parlay together that includes the winningest trainer for the day or the winningest jockey, or even, if trading desks get, that sophisticated, maybe you can make a bet coming down the backside. So, within play, just like you can with football and what's happening as the game goes on. And I think those are the things that, I see as exciting for sports betting and what it can bring, to the younger folks and the younger bettors in this field.
You're absolutely right. We're just starting, right now with just one book up, we're basic bets at the moment, but as it becomes more popular and we get more domestic product, I think we will see more of those prop bets.
Yep. I think it'll be interesting when you can bet the Broncos with the third race at Arapahoe.
I think that will be something.
Guys, what else? Any more comments as we start to wrap this up before I open it up for questions?
I think you covered it all.
Well, not everything. We could go on for a few more hours because it is a complex topic, but I will conclude to say that I'm very hopeful of where this is going. I'm pleased with the progress, a bit slow progress that we've made. We are moving forward and we're hoping to make Colorado successful, or at least successful enough to continue the trial, get more additional states on board and more sports books. Sure.
Yeah, Michelle, Leroy Gussman with Arizona. First, I have two questions. First one is, was it out of the three parties that had to all agree to this, horseman, track owner, and commission, who was the most difficult to get to the table?
Well, I can toss a ball up for that one. At different times during the negotiation, I would say that it would be one or the other. It wasn't necessarily one particularly holding out. I think that where it came at the time in Colorado, as we're talking about it, there was a number of your board members, for instance, and Arapahoe, who all had different preconceived notions of what this was and what this wasn't. Some of them had heard the hype and they thought, well, we're just going to make $1 million this year on this, and that's what you're going to pay, and we're going to go forward. And we're like, no. So we had to spend a lot of time with the economics. The one thing I would say in Colorado, I would do different, no offense to you, Dan, is I do agree with the racing commission in that in the state in which the track is located to give permission as they do with simulcasting. However, I would not have involved the local racing commission moving forward in other states because they really have nothing to do with this. The racing commission that oversees racing at a host track, they are responsible for the rules in racing at that track. And that happens all over the world, no matter where the race takes place. They are the referees and the holders of integrity for that racetrack. What happens when the product gets to a sports book is that sports book's regulator, Division of Gaming in Colorado, in this instance, they are then responsible for the sports betting on that product, what bet types, if they're licensed and everything about that. And, it's the same as simulcasting for a pari-mutuel. It is up to that racing commission in that jurisdiction to make sure that they're providing us a product that has a lot of integrity, that follows certain published regulations. So that would be, I would say they were a little difficult. I would say the Racing Commission may have been the most difficult because I think they wanted to control it, but you can't control something that's on another division's sports book. So that was a little bit of a challenge.
I think the one big thing is when you're first, you might have a few more, you might put up a few more barriers so everybody doesn't feel like they've been, uh, they didn't know what was going on. So at least everybody was at the table, everybody went
Yes.
through it. And I think as it becomes more and more of a common thing, hopefully that people will understand that the Racing Commission in Colorado did not get any money out of this. All the money is still going to water because it is a sports bet. So they were a little bit concerned with that. But I think that at the end of the day, the commission itself was very supportive of moving it forward and giving it a try.
Yeah, it took a little while, but everyone had to come
Yeah.
to the table.
All right, my other question was, like Bet365 is the only operator currently.
Mhm.
So if I'm a Bet365 customer and I'm in Colorado, I can bet the fixed odds at, say, Louisiana track. Do they have the platform where they also offer parimutuel, or is it just
No.
fixed odds?
It's just fixed odds, just right beside football, basketball, and every other sport.
So do you see as this evolves, somebody like FanDuel offering both?
They may, but again, for a sports better, parimutuel wagering can be very confusing.
No, I understand.
Because again, it's on the same kind of odds, the same kind of bet types. You're locking in your bet. You know, where I see fixed odds and parimutuel living together are for horse players. You know, I'm a horse player and I like this horse and I can lock him in over here on Tuesday. And then I may bet him over here in a pick six later on. So I can see the two working together, but the way I look at it is a horse player will find what they want. We're trying to find and entice new bettors and people that are just betting on sports books to take a look and bet on horse racing.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of being able to bet on my horse with 10 minutes to go after I come out of the paddock.
Yep.
And lock in the odds instead of having take the odds the computer bettors decide at the time the gate opens. So
And I always remind people they're called fixed odds, but they're not static. You know, a bookmaker is taking this risk. So you may get down on your horse at 5-1, and the next guy comes along, may get the horse at 3-1, but they're locked in when you make that bet. You know what your payout is. So that's the one thing about fixed odds. It does move. Lines move. They move in all sports. So, I always like to remind everyone of that.
Got a question over here, guys.
My name is Will Allen Pievich. I work for Amwager, fairly new ADW, but I am a horse owner and spent a lot of time representing the New York Horsemen. So I appreciate this panel. Great topic, a lot of great insight, a lot of pros and cons. I hope I don't pick on Dan, but I'm glad we talked about ping pong, and I think that's really relevant. It's hard for us to understand that we are a niche sport. My question is how did ping pong benefit from the $100+ million bet in Colorado? And so I'm trying to flip it around.
I can answer that actually from content side.
Go ahead.
So there are content providers for every sport. Like SIS, we do horses, numbers, and esports. And we either represent the league or we produce the content ourselves, represent the racetrack. And in that job, we go and negotiate with that league or that game. So whoever was representing ping pong and providing their data and selling it, a portion of that was going back to the actual sport.
Just as you would see when the sports books buy content or data from the NFL, from MLB, they're paying for that data and they're getting something out of it.
It's different for every sport, and I can't say one size fits all, but in today's world, at least in the US, there is the content producer is getting something whether it's direct, indirect,
Yep.
back.
Gotcha. And not to put you on the spot, but is it 1%?
Well, most of the deals in sports betting is no longer turnover. You know, we like to say, how much is it in turnover? But we see deals around the world that can be in three different buckets. It can be a turnover deal or a handle deal, percentage of handle. It could be a fixed fee, those are the older deals or fixed fees. And then what's most popular right now is a percentage of GGR. So it's everybody's taking the risk, you know, especially when you go to a sports book who's never done a sport, they don't want to pay you a percentage of handle and then maybe lose. And so now they're paying twice. They're paying because they lost because of their book and they have also had to pay. So most of the deals we see in sports wagering today are GGR. So that means everyone's got some skin in the games that the bookmakers or sports books do well with that content.
Right. And we can, I guess, estimate what it is under our traditional model of turnover, taking the fixed amount or whatever number you come up with at the end of the day. So I just think it's really relevant for this group to understand really what they're looking at, because in New York, while sports betting on horse racing is not legal, hopefully it will be soon, there's a 51% tax rate. And when the books are holding around 9% from every dollar wager on average, and I think there was a slide that said the net hold is around 9 or 10%. With a 51% tax rate going off the top and all this other stuff, it does make it tough from an economic standpoint. And I think this group would benefit from understanding what that is so that they can make that decision. But anyways, I appreciate it. Just thought I'd ask the question.
I think as we've said a couple of times, every state's going to be a little bit different at what works for them, whether they get some of the taxes kicked back to them for purses, or whether they make some other kind of a deal. I think it's all going to work out, whether you work out by regulation, which we did, which didn't really have a statute set, but you also have the other possibilities of putting it into statute, to taking, for legislators to give part of what's taken in taxes for horse racing back to horse racing. That seems maybe a model that works. And if you've got a legislature that is sympathetic to horse racing, and really wants to keep it going, that might be what they do, and kind of forego the big taxes on that one product.
And sports books and bookmakers do have a limit on what they're going to pay. I mean, it's maybe different if we're talking about a marquee race that everyone is watching on TV versus the fifth at Arapahoe.
Exactly.
But
It was
what
a great race.
it was, but what we are seeing is that there's a number. There's a number for all content, and it has to be reasonable. And in setting those expectations is important, because we're looking at volume here versus purely what that number is. And it's hard to tell you what it's going to be here in the US because we're just getting started.
It's just understanding the margins are different. And, we had months in Colorado where we held 2%. We've had months in Colorado where we hold 10%. It's how the books are doing against the players.
As we wrap up, I want to ask one last question, because we've kind of skirted around it a little bit, but I do want to make it clear, because I think this is one of the positives in what Colorado did. Is, Dan, can you touch a little bit on the discussion between regulation versus legislation and putting it in state statute? Because I know there are states that, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, maybe even Nebraska has pari-mutuel wager on horse racing. So there's conflicts there that could take quite a long time in changing statute versus regulation. So again, I think for our new states looking at that, to me, that was kind of the brilliance of being able to get it going in a good way and being able to model it a bit more closely to the Interstate Horse Racing Act.
Right. I mean, we were in a good position because we didn't have any prohibition against taking a sports wager on horses. So we were able to get into and put it into our regulation, and it didn't go without quite a few meetings with my attorney general to make sure that they were comfortable doing that. And they were not right off the bat, but but after we convinced them, and I convinced them it was a sport and been a sport all my life, that we were going to move forward that way. But I think when you look at if you're involved in any of the new states, or if you're involved in changing you may have to change your legislation to allow for it. It's going to be more difficult because, legislators and the operators really don't want to see legislation reopened for hardly any reason. And so you have to have everybody on board going forward. And I think that's where the more we get to try this, the more we get data, the more we can use that in the legislative discussion to make sure that legislators understand it, and one negative voice doesn't drown out all the others.
And I think that the key is, how do you get the source feedback to the local horsemen? And we only see that in Australia, where you have what's called race field legislation that dictates what the fee is based upon the purse structure for the day. The UK is a little bit more nuanced with a levy that comes from the bookmakers. So here, I think where the trick comes is, how many tracks do you have in that state? How do you divide up that source fee? That's where we don't see those issues around the world. It's very, very much the US centric,
Yeah.
because in other places, they're just worried about what this track receives, the host track receives. Where here, we have this whole concept of source fee by state. And, while you've done it your way, and it was the way you did it in the regulation, and there was one racetrack, it was workable. But I think long-term, I'd much rather see, if the state racing is going to benefit, that it be in a way that's mandated, so that it's a level playing field. Because every time you add another fee and another fee, because if I'm representing a track wherever and it's not a local track, well, they expect to be paid for their content they're putting on that show. And then we're going to add another fee on top of it for the local folks. And then there's services that come in there. And the sports books, have cost as well. They have to have traders and technology to put it out there. So this cost keeps going up and up on the price of horse racing. So when we craft any kind of legislation or regs, we really need to speak with the sports books themselves. And I know, Dan, you did that, as to what they'll pay. It is an ongoing discussion that we have on a daily basis around the world, with what a sports book feels that horse racing is worth, especially with what racing thinks it's worth.
It's a whole new kind of economic, and so just as you do it, you're going to come up with what works for your state, what works for your horsemen, and what works for everyone else. And unfortunately, hopefully everyone understands that it's different economic, and you have to look at it differently. But I think the positive in the long run is going to outweigh that look at how the economics work today.
And the key is collaboration.
Yes.
It's definitely
Yeah.
collaboration between the sports books, the tracks, the horsemen, and the content providers. They're selling to them.
Everyone should be at the table.
Well, it's a great panel. Thank you so much.